On the show today, what is a dirty bomb and who is ratcheting up nuclear tensions around the Ukraine war? The United Kingdom has a new Prime Minister. What does he have in store for the country? And we round up what lies ahead for China in the wake of the 20th Congress of the Chinese Communist Party. First up, the words dirty bomb featured in headlines around the world as common people try to figure out whether the world is moving closer to some kind of out-of-control escalation of the war in Ukraine, and which side, if not both, is pushing closer to the edge of desperation. 60 years after the Cuban Missile Crisis, it's almost incredible to watch and listen to the posturing of global leaders, particularly senior leaders from the world's most militarized nation, and makes you wonder whether any lessons were learned from all of it or from living on the brink of nuclear mutually assured destruction for all these years. Prabir Bukayasa, NewsClick's editor-in-chief, has been following and analyzing the war in Ukraine and all the rhetoric as well as the actions surrounding it. He's in studio today to share his understanding of where we are at currently. Prabir, good to have you with us in the Daily Debrief studios again. Whenever the world sort of wakes up to this kind of headlining of dirty bombs, nuclear warfare, warnings from the world's superpower to another nation of what might happen if, it's a scary thought. First, before we get into the wider debate around nuclear weapons and what is going on the ground, what are the facts that we have at our disposal? Who is saying what? What has Putin said? And what has been the response from Ukraine, NATO and its allies?
Well, as you have said, there's a sort of nuclear saber rattling, if you will, or blaming the other side for starting a possibility of a nuclear attack. This has been in the air for some time, and we've been hearing about Russia's possibility of nuclear attack for some time as well. And this has been echoed essentially by various leaders on the NATO side. But in this particular case, Russia has raised the possibility of what is called a dirty bomb, and we'll come to what is a dirty bomb, which may be used as a false flag attack. Now, of course, the dirty bomb uses nuclear materials, but it is, in conventional terms, it's an explosive-laden bomb in which normal explosives are used, but it is dosed with radioactive material. So it spews a large radius with radioactive material, and of course, as you know, radioactive material may render an area unlivable because of the nature of radioactivity. So the dirty bomb is not essentially a nuclear bomb. It could be a mixture of both as well. So that, it's not really a nuclear fission.
It's not clearly defined.
Yeah, it's not really a nuclear fission. It could be a partial fission plus basically laced with other radioactive material. So that essentially the diameter, the radius of impact as well as making it really dangerous for people to live, that would increase. So it doesn't cause so much immediate death, but it could cause a large number of deaths in the long run. Now, the dirty bomb issue Russia has raised, because there has been a lot of talk about Russia using nuclear bomb. So it believes this is essentially a red herring created so that Ukraine can use a dirty bomb. It has raised specific allegations against two institutions. One is an enrichment institution. It's basically a metallurgical mineral institution. The other is a research university institution. Both have the capability because, as you know, Ukraine was a part of Soviet Union, and at that point of time, nuclear technology is part of these institutions. So these two institutions have the capability and the knowledge to do what Russia is saying. Are they really doing it? This is the question. And the IAEA has released a statement saying that these two institutions are under their supervision, and that one of them was inspected some time back and no such evidence is there. But they seem to be now, on Ukraine's call, willing to go to these two institutions again. These are the two which have been specifically mentioned by Russia. So if we find that there's nothing to worry about, it's good. Because I think we should all welcome the fact that there is no dirty bomb if that happens. Is it a preemptive call by Russia in order to abort such a process? Could be. We don't know. But it's also true that Zelensky did talk about a preemptive strike on Russia when this whole issue of is Russia preparing for a nuclear strike has been raised. And I think that's an interesting issue why would suddenly Zelensky demand, when he doesn't have a nuclear bomb, a preemptive strike against Russia by NATO, which essentially would unleash nuclear weapons on both sides.
Right.
There is no safe use of nuclear weapons. It has been war-gamed in the 60s, 70s. This was war-gamed by both sides, but we have the reports from the United States, because those things become public after a certain point of time, that the war games showed there is no safe nuclear exchange. You can start with 1, 2, but it will inevitably go into a much larger nuclear exchange, and therefore the tendency would be whoever strikes first would try for what is called a decapitating blow. So this threat of nuclear war, Zelensky is asking for a preemptive strike, essentially is a call for all-out nuclear war. So given that, is there some plan in Ukraine to use a dirty bomb as trigger? We don't know. Or is it that Russia is preempting that possibility by raising it so that they cannot proceed any further? We don't really know. These are games of a certain kind, which is each side double guessing the other, and at the end of it, only history will decide what is really happening.
Right. A scary thought for the rest of the world that is watching and pretty much helpless at this point to even even speculate on what might actually be going on. But the US at this stage has come in, and on the one hand, they've said that Russia is not, by means of whatever intelligence they might have, whether it's satellite or otherwise, that Russia is in no way preparing for any kind of nuclear assault or attack of any kind. On the other hand, a warning from the US, the only country that has a sort of doctrine of preemptive nuclear attack against another country, saying that, if you try something funny, we'll be compelled to do whatever is in our power. Are they ratcheting down tensions, or what is the approach at this point?
Well, a few weeks back, they were really ratcheting up the nuclear tensions on the claim that Russia is somehow preparing for a nuclear attack. It started from Putin's, I think, September 22nd or 21st statement, when he said that if Russia's existence is under threat, then we would use any weapon that is at our disposal. Now, this is a well-known Russia's position. This is not something new. This is something that is their posture, what would be called in US terms a nuclear posture. And that's been reiterated time and again, that if Russia's existence is threatened, then they can use nuclear weapons. What it really means is they will not use it under any other circumstance unless their existence is threatened, which would mean a physical attack on Russia of some kind. Now, if you take that, America's nuclear posture document, which was, I think, reiterated in 2018 or 19, that is much more open. It says not only preemptive strike, as you call it, but what is called preventive strike. Now, preventive strike is qualitatively different from a preemptive strike. Preemptive strike is you are threatening to attack me, you're preparing to attack me, therefore attack you before. It can be argued, there is some basis in the international law for that. It can be argued, though I'm not sure that it is true, that international law justifies a preemptive strike, but there is none for a preventive war. That you may become a threat later on. To prevent that threat, I'll attack you now, is essentially carte blanche, that I can attack anybody when I want. So this, by all international experts, have been accepted that preventive war is not in accordance with international law. But nevertheless, that's US position. Therefore, the US suddenly to talk about Russia being this great threat of nuclear war, because it said if its existence is threatened, it can use any weapon. Now, question is, did US plan to do anything to threaten Russia's existence? Has any country planned to threaten Russia's existence? That is the question. And if you take the context of, say, the Nord Stream 1 and 2 sabotages that have happened, if you go into a little bit in the past, when the US essentially has encouraged a chemical attack that took place in Syria and used it as an excuse to plan for a war on Syria, which fortunately was aborted because Syria said, okay, we'll give up all chemical weapons. Chemical weapons was the issue at that time. All of that shows that the US positions on all of these is highly problematic. And unfortunately, they do not show much, doesn't seem to show much confidence in what their intentions are if they ratchet up the nuclear threat the way they have done, while at the same time saying they see no evidence of it. In that case, why are you ratcheting up this whole threat? Particularly when Putin has said what is their official nuclear doctrine. He has not said anything outside it. Well, the US official nuclear doctrine, as we have said, is really far more aggressive.
Thanks very much for that update today, Prabir. The UK has its third Prime Minister this year, and in a fact that is being much celebrated, the first person of colour to head the government. Rishi Sunak emerged victorious in another Conservative Party leadership tussle, and now can add the title of Prime Minister to his list of offices held, including 2 years as Chancellor of the Exchequer. But what tricks does the man who is now vowing to clean up the mess left by Liz Truss, who came in to clean up the mess left by Boris Johnson before her, have up his sleeve? Can the Tory party provide a way out of the economic crisis gripping the United Kingdom? What should other people of colour be aware of when celebrating Sunak's rise to the country's highest elected office? Prashant is in studio to field some of these questions. Prashant, over the past few weeks, it's been more than mildly amusing to watch leader after leader of the Conservative Party come and make similar sort of grandiose announcements and talking about the way forward and cleaning up the previous person's mess. Rishi Sunak, particularly given his experience as Chancellor of the Exchequer, probably brings in a little more emphasis on economic recovery in the present scenario as Prime Minister now. But does he have any alternatives? Is there a plan that, may be put into place?
Right. So, I mean, I think we need to see the fall of Liz Truss as among multiple factors. There was also a strong Labour upsurge against her. But this was also a coup among the elite, so to speak, because even the rich got spooked by the extent of the policies, the kind of cluelessness. So this is the return to Rishi Sunak. Rishi Sunak was incidentally the candidate who lost to Liz Truss among the Conservative Party members, which is why he doesn't have any kind of mandate, not even a mandate from his own party, technically, so to speak. But so the return to Rishi Sunak is pretty much a return to the markets, to the way of doing it, way of doing things for the rich as far as it's concerned. So in that sense, Rishi Sunak is the establishment candidate, and we'll come to that a bit later. But keeping that aside, in terms of economic policies, there's a big question as to whether there's going to be much of a course correction. I don't think so. He may not undertake some of the more extreme policies that Liz Truss went all out on, such as huge tax cut for the rich, etc., etc. But I think what there's talk of another austerity budget that's going to come, so that's most likely going to take place. So there'll probably be some kind of measures that kind of seem slightly geared towards and are not so pro-rich, maybe as kind of a sort of, to cover up the whole issue. But largely the direction is will continue to be towards more austerity, towards more spending cuts, towards more benefits for the rich. So although Rishi Sunak has given all this rhetoric about wanting to sort of, care for those who are not included, etc., etc. But his policy framework largely does not suit that. His belief system, which is the belief system of all Conservative prime ministers till now, is very much in line with, let's reduce let's reduce spending as a whole. Let's not spend too much on welfare. Let's try to sort of, whip up the capitalist spirit, so to speak, etc., so that it can continue. So all that is pretty much what his agenda is. And also I think the fact that the crisis that the two previous prime ministers, Boris Johnson and Liz Truss, have left him does not actually give him too much of flexibility either. And we also know that there's a larger context to the Ukraine war, which means that government's flexibilities as a whole are kind of limited considering the energy crisis. So many issues that are there. So keeping all this in mind, I don't expect any drastic change in terms of what Rishi Sunak is going to do. What he'll probably do is to try to give a lot more of rhetoric and some kind of cosmetic measures to maybe address some of the concerns being raised by the poorer sections, by the workers, etc. But the larger arc of his policy, so to speak, will very much continue to be on the lines of what these governments so far have been doing.
Right. In the context of rhetoric and sort of optics that you brought up in terms of at least balancing the interests of working people and other people who are suffering the most from the economic crisis, the appointment of Sunak is being celebrated by many across the world as the first person of color to hold this office. What sort of, you did point to some of the context in which that exists. He is the establishment guy. But just what should sort of people like us be aware of before we go ahead and celebrate this position or this achievement by Sunak?
Yeah, so I think there are a couple of things. One is the fact that Rishi Sunak is the Guardian, I think, has pointed out that his net worth, along with that of his wife, is basically twice that of the king and the consort, so his consort. So that's the kind of rich man Rishi Sunak is. So, talking about people of color and all is slightly problematic in this context because he's, his whole education career, he was a banker. So all that put together, he is like, which is why I said he is as establishment a candidate as you can get in some senses, although his name and his skin color might be a bit different from your traditional conservative prime minister, but in all other ways he is very much part of that establishment, no doubts about it. Even the speech he gave was so boilerplate conservative that it could have been any white man standing there and giving the same speech. So the Conservative Party has a lot of faces of color. For instance, Preeti Patel was the Home Secretary, but we know the kind of policies she's taken against refugees. So it would be misleading, I think, to see the coming to power of Rishi Sunak as some kind of victory for people of color or some kind of realization as far as the UK is concerned, because we're talking about him heading the most anti-worker, anti-minority, anti-refugee party that you have around, that you have in the country. So I wouldn't say that, so it doesn't really make sense that you have, just because you have a token presence, so to speak, or a few faces from people of color, of minorities, of people from different ethnic backgrounds, it means that it is per se a progressive move. So that's what remains to be seen. So we can be pretty sure, for instance, the new Home Secretary, whoever it is, will continue the similar anti-refugee policies that are there and all. So it doesn't matter to the refugees who are struggling for their lives that the Prime Minister of the country is a brown man.
Person.
So I think that's the important takeaway from this.
Thanks very much for that update, and we'll of course keep an eye on what's going on in the United Kingdom. And finally, the 20th Congress of the Communist Party of China concluded at the Great Hall of the People in Beijing, giving the world plenty to talk about in terms of the direction of one of the world's biggest nations and economies. What will it take in the years to come? Dr. Abdul Rahman is in studio to round up the show and will take us through some of the key points emerging from the Congress. Abdul, what do you make of the broad sort of policy outlines as you heard from various announcements made at the Congress?
The reports which have come in public and what Xi was saying during his speech to the press basically on Sunday after the election of the Politburo and other various organs of the party, members in the various organs of the party, it seems that Xi is talking about primarily to kind of build China into a strong, prosperous socialist country by the middle of this century. Which means, according to Xi, kind of increasing the current level of prosperity for the common people, which I think that is the main achievement which he has highlighted repeatedly in last few days, primarily during his speech in the inauguration of the Congress and on Sunday as well, that how China has been able to kind of eradicate absolute poverty, kind of create a moderate level of wealth for all its 1.4 billion people, and how it has basically created a relatively prosperous country, which has become the second largest economy in the world, almost doubling the GDP from 2012 when he took charge. So, building on these achievements in last 10 years, Xi is basically highlighting to make it more stronger, make it more sustainable, and he is repeatedly talking about how China in the coming days will try to build a more harmonious relationship with nature. So climate has become a very strong position, very strong issue, important issue for the CPC. Xi is also emphasizing the role of China in the global politics. And he has, as we saw during the inauguration of the Congress, how he basically talked about China becoming a much more active player in the global politics, trying to create much more peaceful cooperation and development, but also at the same time building Chinese capacity to deal with the various kinds of threats, posed by different countries.
Right.
So if we see, if we see it in totality, the emphasis is on achieving the second centenary goal, as CPC talks about in its policy documents, of building a moderately prosperous socialist society in China.
Right. And from an international perspective, Abdul, those challenges and threats that China is facing, we've covered on this show in the recent past and over months, in fact, building US tensions, rhetoric, encirclement. Any aspects focusing on the challenges that China is facing, particularly in its own backyard?
Yeah, exactly. If you see, again, we have to see both the speeches together. The speech or the report he presented during the inauguration of the Congress, and the speech on Sunday. He talks about how China is facing numerous external challenges at this moment, primarily because he talked about sanctions and attempts to isolate China. There are attempts to kind of intervene in the South China Sea, the issue of Taiwan, the unification of China, and other important issues. For example, the one state, two system policies, the questions related to Hong Kong and Macau, all these crucial issues Xi has talked about, and focus is to build not only the economic power which will help China to face this, but also to take these issues both politically and militarily.
All right. Thanks very much for that update, Abdul. And that's also a wrap on this episode of Daily Debrief. As always, for more details on these stories and all of the work we do, we invite you to head over to our website, peoplesdispatch.org. And of course, don't forget to give us a follow on the social media platform of your choice. We'll be back with another episode, same time, same place tomorrow. Until then, stay safe. Goodbye.